think you'll see that in some of this study too, is some protection for those that, are being exploited or could be exploited or that type of thing. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and get into this. So, somebody want to read?
So we start with verse 2?
No, we're gonna
Okay.
we're gonna go with verse 1. I might have to have a man read verse 1 though. It's pretty rough.
Well, it's rough for
Okay.
you.
Yeah.
He who is emasculated by crushing or mutilation shall not enter the assembly of the Lord. You want to as well?
Oh, that's a kind version.
Yeah.
What version do you have?
The one on the paper?
Oh,
Yeah.
was this New King James?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You want to read your version?
No, the King, is anyone have King James? I don't know. No, I don't want to read my version.
Why
not?
Chicken.
Let's see. No one who is emasculated or has his male organ cut off may enter the assembly of the Lord.
There you go.
The Bible tells it like it is.
Okay, I read a couple of different commentaries on this one, but the pagan practices a lot of times were to do that. They were either to do that to get favor with their gods, or in some cases they were to do that because they might sell a son to be a eunuch in service so they could make money for him, for like a rich family that was looking for a servant. So they would cut him off and send him away, right? And so this prohibition, the commentary I said or read was that this was not an accidental thing, right? This was a purposeful thing. Like if someone was accidentally injured, there was provision and there was grace for that. But this is if you were mutilated, and then there was also, at least in some of the commentaries, there was like a way that if it was a young child that this was done to, there was a way for them to be restored by faith. They just couldn't be a Levite and serve as a priest, right? There was a hard line on that. But is that kind of what you read?
Yeah, I mean, there's a holiness principle that as you move closer, so that the camp was, the ark in the center, Moses and the Levites around it, and then the 12 tribes around it. And as you move closer, the standards got higher. And that's one thought here. Yeah, I didn't get a chance to dig into the study this week, but just as I'm thinking about it, 10 years ago we would read this verse and go, "Oh, who would do that?" And now, look at the front page, right?
Right.
People are doing this. So
Yeah, transgenderism.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead.
Another thing that came out of a sermon I heard recently was that when, like, the Babylonians took the Israelites captive, the 4 men that were in the flames on the, when
Shadrach,
Nebuchadnezzar had his
Meshach, and
golden
Abednego.
idol,
Yeah.
were living in the house of the eunuchs.
Well, they had to be snipped.
Right, and so the supposition is that probably they and Daniel were demasculated.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's a way of creating submission in your enemies.
Yeah, but I mean, think how powerfully God worked through Daniel in spite of that, right?
Right.
I mean,
yeah, and a lot of this, there's the plain reading, which is you can't enter the assembly. The secondary reading is you will not do this. Don't do this to your children or to yourself.
Now, McGee kind of took a different stance on this. He said it was kind of like asceticism, which is, kind of like you see monks do this a lot, where they kind of, they may cut their organ off, or, they take that verse literal, like if your eyes make you sin, poke it out, that kind of stuff. And it's asceticism, meaning that you know, I'm not worthy, I'm gonna like physically make myself holy instead of letting God do the work, right? Yeah, we see that in like certain religions, like Jehovah's Witness, you know, for instance. Those people have quotas, you know, there's a reason that they have to go knock on your door and do all that because they're trying to earn their way to heaven, you know, which is very sad, but they're doing that. They're worried about the external and they're not relying on God and what He did, right? And then the other part he made, which I thought was he said, I found some of these people to be dangerous. They act very pious, and I seem very shocked at anything worldly before them. I've also found the same people to be the meanest gossips. You know? So, I mean, the thing is like when you're trying to outwardly be that way, then you have almost no compassion for the people that are struggling.
No
right?
difference than the Pharisees and the
Yeah,
Sadducees and the scribes.
yeah, but thankfully we don't have to worry about religious people in judgment today. Right? So,
You can delude yourself all you want.
Yes, I agree.
yeah. Okay. Verse 2.
One of illegitimate birth shall not enter the assembly of the Lord, even to the 10th generation. None of his descendants shall enter the assembly of the Lord.
Now, what I read on this is like the
Similar,
previous one. It has to do with the idolatry practices. Remember, temple worship or shrine worship, what that involved, right? Not to get graphic, but there were prostitutes and there was lots of illegitimate children. So, but like what we're talking about there, the illegitimate children, you know, at some point, if they, McGee kind of put this as like now with Christ, you know, all children are legitimate if they accept Christ, right? And no matter what your lineage is, if you don't accept Christ, you're not a legitimate child,
True.
right?
Yeah, that second paragraph's interesting.
Yeah. So I thought that was a good take on this verse.
There are a lot of baptized pagans today,
Yep.
so they're illegitimate.
Mm-hmm.
I was at a funeral this past week. It's been 30 years since I've been to a funeral like this, but it was all about his accomplishment. Jesus Christ was proffered twice in a prayer, but he was not centered. And I couldn't wait to get out of that service. You know, it's like, I'm here to support that woman who's now a widow, but I don't have to stick around for this.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting point. I've been to some of those funerals and there's just like,
It's empty.
it's so sad.
Mm-hmm.
It's so sad. You can almost feel that the person didn't have a relationship with the Lord when you go to the funeral. It's a very heavy funeral service when that happens.
Interesting note on this. If you look at Jesus's genealogy, you've got, when we did Genesis, there's chapter 38, which is really odd and strange. But yet, Perez is in, if you know the story, it's, well, do you want to get into the story? I don't want to derail it. Anyway, it's illegitimate. Perez is illegitimate by this definition.
And by incest.
Put it that way, by incest, yeah. And then if you count Perez, Hezron, Ram, Aminadab, Nahshon, Salmon, Boaz, Obed, Jesse, David, that's 10. So you have an illegitimate son, and then you've got the 10th generation who is David, who inherits. I just,
Yeah.
again, another coincidence that's...
And we're going to get to Boaz later on.
Yeah.
So with the
Well, I'm
Moabite.
going to take you to task on another relative of his when we get to the next verse.
Okay. 3 and 4.
It says, an Ammonite or a Moabite shall not enter the assembly of the Lord. even to the 10th generation, none of his descendants shall enter the assembly of the Lord forever, because they did not meet you with bread and water on the road when you came out of Egypt, and because they hired against you Balaam, the son of Beor, from Pethor of Mesopotamia, to curse you.
So, Balaam, this was the story with the donkey, right? So,
And the cursing.
yeah.
This is only fourth generation from Ruth to David, and she's a Moabite. I know there's grace, but
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, Ruth was, she chose by faith, right? So
Yes, she did.
she's
But Ruth
the
didn't
exception.
enter. Yeah.
And, you know, she was counted because of her faith.
And you're saying David had Moabite blood in him and he shouldn't have been allowed to enter?
yes, he did 4 generations
Yeah.
back. But it's God's grace,
Yeah.
and ultimately it is God's grace.
That's a good point.
The Balaam thing, you know, if those that recall that story, Balaam couldn't curse Israel.
Children
Right.
of Israel, he wasn't allowed.
He wasn't
Yeah.
allowed to curse the children of Israel. So that should be a comfort to us, right? That they're not allowed to curse us as long as we're in good standing. Now, what did they eventually
What could he do? Yeah.
What did they eventually do? Because the devil, once he's blocked one way, he tries another. So what did they eventually do, Chris?
So he says, here's what you do. You put your prettiest Moabite girls, Moabite girls, and they won't be able to resist. And then they'll fornicate and they will sin against them God themselves without you helping them, although they enticed them and set a trap. So there's an entrapment problem we've got here, which God doesn't.
So does Satan ever do those temptations to try to get us?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But even on entrapment, there's still a person making a choice, right? Whether they were set up or not.
Exactly. But the devil's gonna try, you know. It seems like when I'm not being attacked, then I kind of have to worry, right? It's kind of like I'm being attacked all the time. I went to a men's conference this weekend. Both boys went, which was a huge praise that I got both boys to go.
Yeah.
And then immediately after the men's conference, they're both fighting. You know, it's like the attacks start almost immediately, you know. And I've got a red-headed son that's strong-willed, so you can imagine, you know. So, you know, the attacks start almost immediately. So the good news is it must have been a really good conference, right?
So what is this about hair color?
I get it. I used to be a redhead.
Edomites.
Yeah.
Redhead.
Strong will.
Yeah.
That's 5 and 6.
Nevertheless, the Lord your God would not listen to Balaam, but the Lord your God turned the curse into a blessing for you, because the Lord your God loves you. You shall not seek their peace, nor their prosperity all your days forever.
Okay, so he turns the curse into a blessing. Isn't that fascinating?
Mm-hmm.
And then the Expositor Bible's commentary here says the entirety of the human race, because of the fall, is plagued by the curse, but Jesus turned the curse into a blessing and did so at the cross. I thought that was a good comment. And then McGee warns, of course, of false religions, right, in this verse. no doubt Satan is quite at home on churches in America on Sunday morning. Some. Quite at home because he can get us to practice religion and not focus on the relationship and divorce us from all the power that we have to make an influence in America and beyond in our world. 7 and 8.
You should not abhor an Edomite, for he is your brother. You should not abhor an Egyptian, because you are an alien in his land. The children of the third generation born to them may enter the assembly of the Lord.
Okay, the Edomites were, of course, descendants from Esau, right? So Esau, in spite of the Lord saying some very strong language to Esau, and Jacob I love and Esau I hate, right? He hated him for his birthright and not valuing that, right? Because he sold it for a bowl of beans, right? But nonetheless, he didn't punish the descendants. They were still family, because you see the grace of God. And even Egypt, if you think about it, Egypt, was kind of used by God throughout. Even our Lord went to Egypt, right? So Egypt, he has a grace, he has a way of using all the keys on the piano. Go ahead.
It's true even now, because Egypt is an ally of Israel. Just the Houthis in there are messing things up, but they're not.
Right.
Egypt proper.
That's a good point. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Let's go on to 9 through 14.
This is when the army goes out against your enemies, then keep yourself from every wicked thing. If there is any man among you who becomes unclean by some occurrence in the night, then he shall go outside the camp. He shall not come inside the camp, but it shall be when evening comes, that he shall wash with water, and when the sun sets, he may come into the camp. Also, you shall have it placed outside the camp, where you may go out. And you shall have an implement among your equipment, and when you sit down outside, you shall dig with it, and turn and cover your refuse. For the Lord your God walks in the midst of your camp to deliver you and to give your enemies over to you. Therefore your camp shall be holy, that he may see no unclean thing among you and turn you away from you.
Cleanliness is holiness,
Yeah.
right? So there is some biblical truth to that here. The thing that struck me was this one verse, I guess it's 14 there. It says, for the Lord your God walks in the midst of your camp to deliver you and to give your enemies over to you. Therefore your camp shall be holy, that he may see no unclean thing among you and turn away from you. Put your name in that, and put your own camp, put your own house in that. That's kind of convicting,
Very
right?
much.
Is there anything in my camp that's unholy that God could turn away from my camp for, right? That's pretty convicting, that he walks through our camp. And the whole idea is, now that we're on this side of the cross, we have the Holy Spirit. So how much more, it's not like
He still walks in our midst, right?
right, he goes everywhere we go, right?
Yeah.
So we're dragging him down to the lowest or up to the highest, wherever we choose, right? It's not like that video, there's a YouTube where the guy says he has God in a box, and it's a little joke, but it's like, okay, I keep God in a box so I can pull him out when I need him, and you know, I can put him back in the box if I want to lie to the police officer and get out of a ticket, you know, or do that type of thing, right? So he's, you know, and unfortunately that's how a lot of Christians are today, you know, they put God in a box, right? God can't, we're deceiving ourselves, right? James 1:22. Gotta be doers of the word. You gotta expect it, and you gotta know that it's coming, and we're called to be salt and light, and we're not called to separate. I mean, on Friday I got a call, I think right before the conference, or this week I got a call, I think I mentioned it Wednesday night, but I got a call from one of my contacts in DC where I teach, and the lady from San Francisco lodged a complaint with the regional director of San Francisco against me for saying God in the classroom, and that I what's the word? I forget, but you know, they have all these DEI words, so I triggered her, you know, or something by my Christianity, and so he said, so has your boss called you yet, or you know, have you heard yet? I wanted to just let you know that she filed an official complaint. I was like, no, but I assure you that my boss Troy has heard many a complaint about this, and he will not be surprised. And you know, and I do have a First Amendment right, and I will proclaim God. Ironically, I gave her a star award and gave her a compliment for her work.
Yeah, I was thinking Wednesday. I
And
thought you guys ended well. Yeah.
And this is what I got, you know. But once again, that's what we should expect,
Yes.
right? So
Sinful people do sinful things, no surprise.
yeah, and hurt people,
Yeah.
hurt others,
Yes,
you know, and she's hurt. She
Yeah.
came out of a Mormon faith that did a lot of damage to her, and she's angry at God, and she's lashing out.
And you're
You know.
You're in the
flesh and
way.
blood, so you're
Yeah.
target.
Yep.
I think it's interesting the standards here on soldiers. We know what happens. So God says, okay, you know, it's another one of these things where he could have just banned. He says you're gonna, you know, he could have just said you're gonna behave yourself if you're representing me, which he would have been in his right to say. Instead, he says if you become unclean, you can't fight, and you're gonna let your comrades down, and they're gonna see you have to, you know, sit this one out because they know, you know.
Well,
Something happened. I mean, it could have been this says nocturnal, but you know, that could have been that. But probably it's the other.
the principle of having latrines outside of the camp, besides being biblical, is true in every military engagement, that wherever you are, that somebody builds a latrine away from where you're at, and to cover it for a hole. And there was a movie, I think it was the Green Berets, when they were on mission. One of the gentlemen said, you know, the latrine is taken care of. You know, and it's like he went to do something else, but it struck me because I had just read Deuteronomy at that time, and it was like, comes back to that.
Outside the camp.
Yeah. And you know, we've seen all kinds of horrible diseases that have plagued, you know, if people just followed this, wouldn't have happened. You know.
It is a verifiable fact during the Black Plague. Jews had the least amount of people infected because of their kosherness, cleanliness.
15 and 16. Who'd like to read?
You shall not give back to his master the slave who has escaped from his master to you. He may dwell with you in your midst, in the place which he chooses within one of your gates, where it seems best to him. You shall not oppress him.
Okay, so this is an interesting one. I kind of
Very
alluded
interesting.
to this before, but this is a verse about essentially a foreign slave, which would have come from one of these pagan countries who's being abused, and they're going to run to Israel for shelter, right? So they're a refugee, if you want to use that term, but they're a refugee and they're looking for shelter, and they're a slave by where they came from. So from a property law standpoint, then they would have to be returned because
Right.
it was somebody else's property. But God says, oh no, because they're a person and they're made in my image.
Right.
So no, you are not going to return them in this case. Now understand, slavery was quite different than what we imagine today. We fool ourselves that there's no slavery today. There's a lot of it. It's just in different terms, right? But back in that day, it was very common, even in the Jews, that you would be an indentured servant,
it's
right?
part of the economy. Yeah.
Paul even talked about the dowel through the ear and, being a bondservant. So understand, but God had rules on that, right? There was 7 years, and then there was the Jubilee for all the debt and all that. He had rules around that. And our culture has defined things that are not historically accurate. Like, for instance, in America, most people that came to America, regardless of color, came as slaves. They came as indentured servants. They couldn't pay the fare on the ship to get here. So they almost all came as slaves, and they had to burn that time off. Okay, so the whole talk about all this is kind of disingenuous. Now, the most egregious kind, of course, was the slave trade, but we have that song Amazing Grace, about that. But the thing here is God cares about all of his image bearers. And I think this is what it's saying, is that we have to have that same type of grace towards even the people from San Francisco. Thoughts, questions? The next verse, a little dicey, but actually came up during our men's conference.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah. So 17 and 18.
There shall be no ritual harlot of the daughters of Israel, or a perverted one of the sons of Israel. You shall not bring the wages of a harlot or the price of a dog to the house of the Lord your God for any vowed offering, for both of these are an abomination to the Lord.
Okay, first off, a dog here is not a reference to a canine. The dog here is a male prostitute. Okay? So, equal opportunity paganism, unless you say that doesn't happen today. At our conference, one of our speakers was now a Christian pastor that was a former adult porn star. Filmed 1,000 movies in the porn industry, and came up, and life had, God totally changed his life. He's now a pastor, got a beautiful wife, big family with kids, and the whole 9 yards. And he was very open about it. And his talk, which I thought was one of the better ones, but his talk was our secrets and how they control us. And if you think about it, kind of like we get a lot of whistleblowers and those type of things. And these whistleblowers are not safe until their secret is out. Because until you put it in the press and you get it out in the media, then you're not safe, because you can be killed, so the message doesn't get out, right? You can be Epsteined, right? So this is the same way in a spiritual sense, right? We all have these dark secrets, but unless we do James 5:16 and confess to one another so that we may be healed, then these dark secrets,
Perpetuate.
Yeah.
right. And that's what he talked about. His testimony is quite powerful. He was saying that, you know, he got to the point where he couldn't do it anymore, and he was so convicted that he fled and he went back home, and then he went to the gym and he started, you know, modeling at the gym, because that was the only thing he could think he could do, and he thought he could just put it behind him, but he was tormented by it. And you know, and then finally he went out on a date, and he had to tell the person he dated all about his past. He had to tell her, you know, and that's a very hard first date, as you can imagine. But he had to do it, right? And then God blessed him. That ended up being his wife. So, but that's what we have to do. We have to confess those sins. We have to get those sins out of our lives. We've talked about this before. We in Mexico, we did a thing on spiritual warfare, and a lot of us have, like, you know, our ribs open. You know, we got all this armor on, and we got a gap right here, and that gap is those unconfessed secrets. It's that area, it's that closet that you haven't let God into. You know, you got to clear out the closets. I have a lot of closets at home that need clearing out and moving. Physical sense, but spiritually too. Okay. Thoughts, comments, questions? Okay.
So the word for dog in Hebrew is Caleb. I'm never gonna look at Caleb the same way again.
Yeah, but Caleb was
Poor
a good
guy. He was a good guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
If that was a nickname for. Yeah, and my notes here say C. You know, C the it says probably refers to a male prostitute. So, yeah, it's like ooh, poor. What a name to have.
Yeah.
I don't think I'll name anyone Caleb.
Well, there's certain names that aren't too cool now, like Jack and
Yeah.
John and
They go in cycles.
Yeah.
Mary.
You know, and I think we've already mentioned this, but Rahab, of course, was a prostitute, but faith overcame that, right? She acted in faith, and she's in Hebrews. You know, we've been covering her. Go ahead.
It's interesting that they put a qualifier in verse 17, no ritual harlot. Doesn't that mean a harlot that is participating in a sexual worship?
I would say that would be a temple prostitute.
Specific to cult
Essentially.
prostitute. That's what
Yeah.
NASB has cult prostitute.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah,
I
not
didn't pick
not
up
just
on
any
that.
prostitute. Yeah.
Thank you for mentioning that. 19 and 20.
It says, you shall not charge interest to your brother. Interest on money or food or anything that is lent out at interest. To a foreigner you may charge interest, but to your brother you shall not charge interest. That the Lord your God may bless you in all to which you set your hand in the land which you are entering to possess.
And it's interesting, the Believer's Bible Commentary pulled out Exodus verse that talks about usury to the poor. And then if you think about us in America, I'm of course in the banking business, which is this very definition, right? So, you know, but especially to the poor, I think about credit cards right now, because credit cards are at a record high. We have huge balances nationwide because people can't afford to live. You know, housing prices have gone up astronomically, groceries have gone up, and people are living literally on their credit cards.
Just paying
And-
interest.
And the interest is, 23, 25% on these cards right now. And, this is just evil, right? It's attacking the very
Yeah.
poor that can't afford it. And the rule here was you could charge it to foreign nations, but you're not supposed to charge it
Your
here.
own people. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Hey, they have a comeuppance coming.
Yeah.
and then notice.
Yeah, there's certainly a line where it's, okay, you got to make a reasonable profit versus usury, but we're way beyond wherever that line is.
Now, the question I had here was the blessings depend on the obedience of Israel. If you read that last verse, the Lord your God may bless you in all which you set in your hand in the land which you are entering to possess. So it's a conditional blessing, right?
Mhm.
If they're charging in usury, then they can't be blessed. So if we apply that to us, then the blessing depended on the obedience of Israel. Since we are under grace, how does the obedience apply to us today? So how do you think this applies to us today?
It's a good discussion to have because they were given the land, you could say, by grace, right? They didn't do anything to deserve getting that possession, but they had to claim it.
Right.
And they claimed it through obedience, or they were supposed to claim it through obedience.
They claimed a portion.
They claimed not all God. They didn't claim all that God wanted for them.
Like 10%,
Yeah.
right, of the total land. that
Yeah.
they
But there were
supposed to get.
at least two faithful of the Israelites who crossed over the Jordan.
Yeah.
At least two we read about, which is Joshua and Caleb.
So there's a national and individual.
Yeah, so nationally they
Yeah.
failed miserably, but individuals were obedient. There's more than Caleb
Sure.
and
Yeah.
Joshua, but this
Not
is
many.
who we're told
Yeah.
of as being obedient, conquering those giants. Doing what the Lord. You've enabled me to do this. I'm
God
going
bless
to
you.
do this. And I appreciate those people who are willing to stand out, be an example. Whether my brother or sister serves the Lord, I will serve the Lord.
Mhm.
It's not dependent, my obedience is not dependent on my neighbors. My obedience is my own. And I need to set that example for my family going forward.
I agree, but I would just say that God does both, right?
He does.
So he judges nations and he judges individually. So like in the like we saw with Goshen, right? So the people of Goshen were spared, but Egypt had all the plagues, right? So if we just from a type and a shadow and applying this to us today, if we individually don't do these evil practices of usury, then God can bless us individually. But as a nation, with us doing this, then according to this, then God can't bless us as a
Yeah.
nation.
We're supposed to influence each other to,
Right.
you do it, you do it, you do it, you do it, I do it, and then we influence those that we,
Right, and then it impacts,
yeah.
going out.
The drought that Texas is presently experiencing, and it has been experiencing. I've been in Texas 30 years, and 24 of them have been in drought of some kind, severe or just partial, doesn't matter. I'm not saying I'm righteous, I'm not, but only by God's grace and through Christ's blood does he count me righteous, because when God looks at me, he sees Jesus, and I have imputed righteousness. I don't understand it, that's God thing. But that said, I am experiencing drought conditions like everybody else
Right.
Absolutely.
because of our state sin as well as our national sin. And I'm confessing for myself and for other people but I'm not responsible for their actions. Yeah, that's it.
No, I agree wholeheartedly.
And
That's an
bottom,
excellent
and bottom,
example.
we've got city sin too, because that
Yeah.
that lake was overflowing about 5 months ago,
Right,
and anyway, don't get me started.
okay.
If Jeremiah were here, he could tell you.
Yeah,
How the lake doesn't.
definitely are
How the
not
city
being
does
good
not
stewards
does not manage the lake
of
very
the
well.
lake.
Yeah.
21 and 22.
When you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay to pay it, for the Lord your God will surely require it of you, and it would be sin to you. But if you abstain from vowing, it shall not be sin to you.
Okay, so this gets into the whole vow question. Jesus kind of raises stakes when we get
Yeah.
to the New Testament because he said, let your yes be
Yeah,
yes
so
and
he
let
did.
your no be no, right? So, I mean, the way I take this is it's kind of our pagan culture that we have to vow, we have to rely on God because we're saying that our word isn't good enough, right? Because we don't have enough integrity.
Mm-hmm.
We're in such a land that people don't have it. It's like, what did Thomas Jefferson say? You know, it's a republic if you can keep it,
Yeah.
right? So it's like we have lost so much of integrity as a people that we have to do vows. And then the vows themselves are somewhat meaningless. I mean, okay, I'm a federal employee,
Yeah.
right?
Don't lie to you.
Okay, so as a federal employee, I had to make a vow to the Constitution. Okay, has anybody noticed how the federal government is treating the Constitution today? Every one of them took a vow just like I did, right? But even my vow to the Constitution is meaningless because A, I'm trained on everything. I'm trained on a lot of sexual harassment and DEI and banking rules, and I'm trained on everything. But ask me how many trainings I've had on the Constitution. Ask me if I was told to read the Constitution or trained on the Constitution before I was supposed to make that vow to the Constitution, right? Nothing. I've got no. What does the Constitution say about money and banking? It says there shouldn't be a central bank. It stipulates that our money should be based on silver and that the states should do it, not the federal government. Yet I'm doing a constitution as a federal banking regulator, doing a currency that is against the Constitution. It's by definition totally wrong
Conflicted.
in every way, yet I'm going through the process of this vow. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So does that nullify the vow?
I mean,
Yeah.
what's the purpose of the vow, right? I mean, it's,
At that point, they were just words, and you've broken something that was supposed to be sacred.
And did you say
Yes.
so help you got at the end?
I
Do you remember?
don't remember. I mean, that was
That would be kind of curious given your
16
San Francisco
years
person.
ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Proverbs 20:25. It is a trap for a man to dedicate something rashly, only to later to reconsider his vows.
Mm-hmm. Guess I need to do some repenting, huh?
Well, I think there's another side to this too, and I've been kind of as I'm reading for Samuel, it's like, okay, they didn't take the land they were supposed. They didn't take all the land they were supposed to take, but by not doing that, they ceded that ground to the enemy. And then it's like, okay, there's a double edge to this, right? If God has all these promises for us, if we would only be faithful and claim them, when we don't claim them, it's not that they're just sitting there. It's like someone else is going to complain them. It's like, yeah, that really struck me.
And that's exactly what we've done, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we've said that we've taken the lie that we should be the silent majority.
Yeah.
You know, our Constitution declares God all over it. You can't study the Constitution and know, and there's a reason why our schools don't teach money You know, how many classes, how many schools teach Dave Ramsey and how you handle money and finances and all that, right? There's a reason, right? Because if you actually knew that, then you wouldn't sign up for credit cards at 25%, right? And they don't teach that on purpose, and then they don't teach your Constitution, because if you knew your rights, then you wouldn't let people violate those rights, right?
Nor your government to do it.
Yeah, but whose fault is that, right?
Yeah.
It's us, right? We've allowed this because we've been silent. So just like Chris said, what we don't speak up for, the enemy takes. And now all of a sudden we're yelling calf rope, you know, and the honest thing is this has been happening for 100 years. It's just been a slow creep, because the enemy, guess what? They have a long-term plan.
Mm-hmm.
They get it. They want their kingdom, and they're working towards their kingdom. And unfortunately, the church, we're saying, Jesus, take the wheel, come back, you know, and we're not working towards it. And that's not what we're called to do. That's not biblical. We're supposed to be working towards it. We're supposed to be leaning in. We're supposed to be that salt and light. We're supposed to influence that culture. We're supposed to help his kingdom come.
Yeah.
You know?
Want a current example of somebody doing it right?
Yeah.
Wednesday night, Jack Hibbs preached on his, they have a special called Come Back California. And he preached on, he had a bunch of different people that were running for different offices give their little spiel in it. You know, conservative groups like Karen England and people like that. But he said everybody needs to show up at the school board tomorrow night, because their community has flipped the school board to have conservative parents have rights, and it's contrasting the whole state of California, and they're catching heck for it. So I went on YouTube last night and I found a video of that school board, and there were people just furious that Jack Hibbs and Karen England were in charge of their school board.
That's awesome.
And yet they were talking about the truth.
They're just citizens, right?
Yeah.
And how parents, you know, so anyway, there are some people that are doing it right.
No,
who
we
are
just need
taking
a lot
stand.
more of them.
Yeah.
We need a
Yes.
lot more of them. And we don't need much, right? I think it was 3% of people supported the American Revolution. 3%. So think about that. You don't need a lot. You just need a lot of people. You need a few that are wholly committed. You need to be wholly committed. You need to be in, right?
When I saw that stat, and I don't know if it's fake news or not, but it said 49% of professing Christians are not going to vote.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that was
I
last
think
one.
it's fake news, but
Yeah.
I mean it's not 100%, right?
It's like breakfast.
Whatever it is,
It's like breakfast. If you go to eat breakfast, there's a chicken and there's a pig involved in breakfast, right? One was involved
if you
in
have hair and
breakfast.
eggs, yeah.
The other was committed, right? So that's what we need to be. We need to be willing. The founders said they would lay down their lives and their fortunes, right? When they did the Constitution. The disciples, you know, all of them, you know, paid, right? We need to be committed. We need to have a long-term view. Somebody want to read 23 through 25, because we got to get out of here. We're running late. I'm
That
sorry.
which has gone from your lips, you shall keep and perform. For you voluntarily vowed to the Lord your God what you have promised with your mouth. When you come into your neighbor's vineyard, you may eat your fill of grapes at your pleasure, but you shall not put any in your container. When you come into your neighbor's standing grain, you may pluck the heads with your hand, but you shall not use a sickle on your neighbor's standing grain.
So briefly here, God is very interested in taking care of the poor, but he's also very interested in property rights. If you notice, there is no socialism in there, right? You can come through and you can feed, but guess what? If you're hungry, you gotta go to the field like
Yeah.
Ruth did, and you gotta be faithful, and you gotta glean from the corners of the field, and you can't put a sickle to it, and you can't harvest somebody else's field, but if you're hungry, you can eat directly in their field so that you don't starve, right? And he's not about enabling, right? And we have a system that enables and creates poverty, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Chris, you want to pray us out? We're running over.
Heavenly Father, thank